When my daughter-in-law told me there wasn't enough space for me on the family trip, I didn't argue. I just smiled and said I understood. A week later, I saw their photos online. My son, my grandkids, Brooke's whole family, all laughing on a yacht in Florida. Everyone was there except me. That night, I sat in my kitchen looking at that picture for a long time. Then I turned off my phone, opened my laptop, and made a decision. They thought I was too old, too soft, too easy to ignore. They had no idea who they were leaving behind. This isn't a story about revenge for being left out. It's about finally remembering my worth after years of staying quiet. And when I acted, I didn't shout or cry. I did something that made Brooke scream 9 hours later. My name is Ruth Ellison. I'm 65 years old, and I've spent most of my life trying to keep my family together. After my husband Charlie passed away 3 years ago, it felt like my world got smaller, but I still showed up. Every birthday, every holiday, every Sunday dinner, even when I wasn't really wanted there. I told myself family was worth the effort, until the day I saw that photo. It was late afternoon when it appeared on my phone. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, the same one Charlie built decades ago, when Brooke's name lit up the screen. The caption said, "What family trip? 34 of us made it on board." I opened it and my heart just stopped. There they all were, my son Mark, my grandkids Emma and Owen, Brooke's mother, her brothers, her cousins, even a few people I'd never met. Everyone was smiling under the Florida sun, glasses raised, ocean behind them. Everyone except me. I stared at that photo for what felt like hours. I counted 34 faces. I even zoomed in, just to be sure. 34. And not one of them was mine. The kitchen felt too quiet. The air felt heavy. The light through the curtains hit the table in a way that made everything look colder. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they'd forgotten to tell me something. But deep down, I knew. 2 weeks before that trip, Brooke had come by to chat. She stood in my kitchen, her arms crossed, a sweet tone in her voice that always meant bad news. "Oh, Ruth," she said, "the yacht's a little full this year. There's just not enough space. And honestly, it's for younger people anyway. You'd be miserable with all the dancing and staying up late." She smiled like she was doing me a favor, and I smiled back because that's what I learned to do around her. I said, "Of course, dear, I understand completely." I didn't. Not then. But I understood now, staring at that photo. They'd decided I was too old, too quiet, too much trouble to include. They'd replaced me with Brooke's family, and my son hadn't said a word. My hands started to tremble, not from sadness, but something sharper. I'd spent too many years being polite, forgiving, invisible. I'd accepted not enough space as an answer to everything. Dinners, trips, birthdays. But there's a difference between being gracious and being erased. I set the phone down carefully and looked around the kitchen. The house was too still. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. Then my eyes landed on the photo of Charlie hanging on the wall. He was smiling, the way he always did when he tried to calm me down after a long day. I whispered, "You always said being left out of the party wasn't the worst thing, didn't you?" The sunlight hit his frame just right, making it glow for a second. It almost felt like he was telling me to stand up, to remember who I was before Brooke made me small. I picked up the phone again and looked at that group photo one last time. Brooke in her designer dress, holding champagne, her arm around Mark like she owned him. Emma and Owen, my sweet grandkids, smiling wide, no idea their grandmother was sitting alone at her kitchen table staring at the proof she'd been replaced. I took a deep breath. They thought they'd left me behind. They thought I'd spend New Year's Eve crying into a frozen dinner, maybe calling to wish them well. They had no idea what they'd just started. That photo, that single picture, changed everything. It was the moment I stopped waiting for an invitation and decided to write myself back into the story. After Charlie passed away, I told myself I just had to keep moving. I filled the days with small things, grocery runs, phone calls to old friends, volunteering at church. I thought if I stayed useful, maybe the silence at home wouldn't be so loud. And for a while, it worked. Until the small silences grew into walls. The first Christmas after Charlie's funeral was when I started to feel it, the shift. I baked 2 pies, packed the trunk with gifts, and drove across town through slush and traffic. When I rang the doorbell, Brooke opened the door wearing her perfect red sweater, smiling like she was being filmed. "Oh, Ruth," she said, voice sweet but shallow. "We ate early. The kids were starving." Inside, the table was cleared, the candles burned low, the dishes stacked in the sink. Mark came over, kissed my cheek, and said, "You know how it is, Mom. Kids get cranky if we wait." I smiled like I understood. Brooke reheated some food on a small plate and set it down in front of me like she was serving a stranger. The kids ran past with new toys, laughing, not even noticing I'd arrived. No one asked about the pies. I sat, pretending not to feel out of place, listening to the leftover Christmas music still playing in the background. That night, I drove home with the uneaten pie beside me, the snow falling heavier, and told myself, "It's okay. It's the first year, they're still adjusting." But deep down, I knew I was the one adjusting, to being optional. By spring, I had joined a small book club at the library. It gave me something to look forward to. People who listened when I talked, who didn't treat conversation like a favor. When Owen's 13th birthday came around, I got the invitation and smiled for the first time that week. Then I saw the time. Thursday, 6 o'clock. Exactly when book club met. I called Brooke, hoping maybe it was a mistake. "Oh, Ruth," she said cheerfully, "that's the slot the place had. You can skip your meeting, right?" I told her I'd come after. She laughed softly. "Oh, don't worry. We'll take lots of pictures." And they did. I saw them later, the cake, the balloons, the candles already melted. When I arrived, the staff was sweeping the floor. Brooke touched my arm and said, "Such a shame you missed the fun. Next time, just check with me before you plan something." I nodded again. But inside, I marked it down like a quiet entry in a private ledger. Birthday. Late. My fault. That ledger grew quickly. There were the dinners moved at the last minute because something came up. The calls that ended with "we'll have to reschedule." The texts that said "next time" but never came. Once I brought a small sweater I'd knitted for Emma. She'd always loved soft things when she was little. Brooke took it with a polite smile and said to her friend standing nearby, "She's adorable, just a bit old-fashioned." The friend laughed. I laughed too, because what else could I do? But I remembered. People say grief fades. I don't think that's true. It just changes shape. Mine became a kind of patience, a quiet waiting for something that was never going to happen. Mark stopped asking me for advice. Brooke started managing the family calendar like a business. Every decision went through her first. If I invited them for dinner, she'd say, "Oh, we promised my mom this week." If I suggested the next weekend, she'd say, "Let me see what the kids have." And if I ever pressed too much, she'd smile and say, "You're so flexible, Ruth. That's what I love about you." Flexible. That word followed me for years. They said it like a compliment. But what they meant was, disappear quietly. Don't complain. What they meant was, be grateful for what we decide you deserve. And I was, for too long. One Thanksgiving, Brooke texted me the night before. "Come for dessert. We're keeping it casual this year." I showed up with coffee and whipped cream, only to find the plates already cleared, everyone half asleep on the couch. I asked if they needed help cleaning, and Brooke said, "Oh no, Ruth, relax. You always do too much." I stood there holding the coffee pot, watching her mother take the last slice of pie I'd brought. That was the first time I realized being invited wasn't the same as being wanted. There were smaller moments too, the kind that don't make noise but leave marks. A phone call missed, a birthday forgotten, a photo of my grandkids on social media, standing somewhere I wasn't told about. Every omission had its own tone, soft enough to ignore, sharp enough to remember. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and didn't recognize myself. Once, I'd been the center of this family, the one who hosted, cooked, planned, laughed the loudest. Now I'd become a background figure, the woman who waited for permission to matter. I'd go to bed rehearsing how to sound cheerful on the phone, so Mark wouldn't worry. I told myself that keeping quiet was protecting him from tension. But really I was protecting them from guilt. And still, I kept track. I never wrote anything down, but the ledger lived in my mind. Christmas missed, birthdays delayed, dinners canceled, the sweater, the comments, the jokes. Each entry small, but together they built something heavy, something that pressed against my chest every time I smiled for their sake. Then one day, Emma said something that stayed with me. She was 11 then, sitting at the table coloring. Brooke was talking loudly on the phone, and Emma looked up at me and whispered, "Grandma, why do you always say okay, even when it's not fair?" I didn't know what to answer, so I smiled and said, "Because sometimes that's what grown-ups do." But later I cried, not because of the question, but because she'd noticed. Children see more than we think. Years passed like that, small cuts, polite erasures, birthdays that came and went. I built my days around their scraps of time and called it love. Until that afternoon in my kitchen, when the photo of 34 smiling faces proved what I'd been too afraid to admit. I was no longer part of their picture. Not forgotten, just erased, carefully, kindly, completely. And for the first time, I stopped making excuses for them. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like something steadier, like a spark. That was the moment the pain started to change shape again, no longer waiting to be soothed, but ready to be answered. That night, the cold came early. Snow was falling in thick, quiet sheets outside the window, blanketing the street in white. Inside my kitchen, the only light came from the small lamp by the fridge, a soft yellow circle cutting through the dark. The kind of night where most people pour tea, turn on the TV, and wait for tomorrow. But I wasn't most people anymore. I sat down at the old desk by the window, plugged in my aging laptop, and waited for it to wake up. It took its time, the familiar hum, the faint click, the whir of old machinery that had been ignored too long. The same way I had. When the screen finally lit, I opened the folder labeled Charlie Ellison Investments, 2005-2015. It had been years since I'd looked at it. Back then, Charlie and I spent nights here, side by side, and coffee cups between us, his voice calm as he explained charts, dividends, the strange logic of the market. Never trust what people say, he used to tell me. Trust the numbers. Numbers don't lie. At the time, I'd smiled and nodded, more out of love than interest. But over the years, I had learned. Slowly, quietly, like I learned everything else, by watching. Now, with that yacht photo burned into my mind, those lessons didn't feel abstract anymore. They felt like purpose. I scrolled through the files, annual reports, client summaries, scanned contracts. Most were just business relics from Charlie's firm, Ellison Investments, but then a name caught my eye. Ellison Media & Co. I frowned. The file wasn't familiar. I opened it. Inside, a corporate registration form dated 2017, Brooke Ellison, co-CEO Mark Ellison, partner 20%. The rest belonged to a list of silent investors and minor shareholders. So, this was it. The family business Brooke always bragged about at dinners. The company she called her achievement, the one she used as proof that I didn't understand modern work. But what she never said, what I now saw in black and white, was that the business carried my husband's name. Charlie's legacy. The same man she once called old-fashioned. I sat back, the irony settling in like cold air. While she'd been busy excluding me from family trips, she'd built her image on the foundation Charlie and I created. Our name, our principles, our money. And Mark, my son, the one I'd raised to be kind, loyal, honest, had gone along with it. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel grief. I felt calculation. Cold, focused, clear. I clicked New Email. The screen blinked white, waiting. To Samir Patel, Attorney at Law. Subject, Private Investment Inquiry. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then I typed, Samir, I'd like to purchase a stake in Ellison Media & Co. through Horizon Equity Group. Please ensure my name remains confidential. I want this done quietly but correctly. I'll wire initial capital in the morning. I stopped there, staring at the words. I hadn't written anything that serious in years. My heart was steady, my breathing even. The fear I thought would come never arrived. I read the message again and added one more line. Let's make this clean, Samir. Just business. Before I hit send, I turned to the photo frame beside the lamp. Charlie's smile stared back at me, that half smile of his, the one that always looked like he knew the ending to a story before it began. I'm just following your rules, I said softly. You taught me how to invest. Now I'm investing in my dignity. For a moment, the quiet in the room felt heavy. Outside, the snow kept falling. A car passed on the street, its tires whispering through slush. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then stopped. I clicked send. A simple sound. One click, but it felt like a door unlocking inside me. I closed the laptop and sat still, letting the hum of the heater fill the silence. The light from the desk lamp hit the edge of Charlie's photo, turning the glass gold. I thought about the years I'd spent waiting to be invited into rooms I helped build. Not anymore. This wasn't revenge, not the screaming, dramatic kind. This was balance. numbers balancing themselves after too long on one side of the scale. As I stood to make tea, I caught my reflection in the window. A tired woman, yes, but one with sharp eyes again. Eyes that could still calculate risk and reward. I remembered something else Charlie had said once, long before he got sick. We were reviewing a client's file and found a massive error another accountant had missed. I'd been hesitant to confront it. He'd looked at me and said, "If you see something wrong and you stay quiet, you've already agreed to lose." That memory hit me harder than I expected, because for years I'd been agreeing to lose. In silence, out of love, out of fear of conflict. Not tonight. Tonight I'd made my first move. Small, quiet, invisible to the world, but it was mine. I sat back down, wrote a few notes on a yellow pad beside the laptop. Step 1, acquire. Step 2, observe. Step 3, decide later. The handwriting was slow, deliberate, the same way Charlie used to outline plans when he was teaching me. Numbers don't lie, I whispered again. People do, and I've had enough of believing them. I looked once more at the email confirmation in my inbox. Message sent. 11:42 p.m. The room felt colder, but my chest felt warm. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was control. And that was a start. Outside, the snow had stopped. The streetlights glowed over a world that looked untouched, almost new. Maybe that's what starting over looked like. Not noise, not fire, just clarity. I turned off the lamp and went upstairs, the floor creaking under my steps. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt steady. And, somewhere deep down, under the calm, a quiet thought took root. If they wanted to see what I was capable of, they were about to. Morning light hit my kitchen window, pale and cold. The world outside was frozen in silver, but inside the smell of coffee was steady, bitter, grounding, the kind that wakes your mind before your body catches up. I sat at the same table as always, only this time the laptop in front of me wasn't just a habit. It was a weapon. The email I'd drafted the night before waited in my inbox, marked pending transaction. I read it again, line by line. Transfer, $1,200,000 USD. Recipient, Horizon Equity Group. Purpose, equity acquisition, Ellison Media and Cohen. Every zero looked clean, sharp, final. I wasn't nervous, just precise. My fingers hovered for a moment over the keyboard. Then I typed one more line. Confirm and execute today. No delays. R.E. click. The sound of the sent tone echoed like a heartbeat. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past, tires crunching through the frost. Ordinary sounds, ordinary morning, except nothing about this moment was ordinary. I took a sip of my coffee and opened social media. The first post on my feed was from Brooke, a slow-motion video of waves breaking on white sand. The caption read, "Sunset at the villa, grateful for every blessing." Her voice played softly in the background, laughing, light, carefree, as if the world had never known sadness. Her hair moved perfectly with the ocean breeze. Mark appeared beside her for a second, his arm around her waist, smiling like a man who didn't see the cracks forming underneath his life. The post already had hundreds of likes. I stared at it for a few seconds, then closed the app. The screen went dark, reflecting my own face. Calm, focused. Not jealous, just awake. If life were a movie, this would be the split-screen moment. On one side, sunshine, waves, champagne. On the other, the blue glow of a laptop in a quiet kitchen in Minneapolis. She toasted the sky. I pressed send. Different kinds of power. At exactly 8:07 a.m., my Zoom notification pinged. Incoming call, Samir Patel. I clicked join. Samir appeared on screen, sharp suit, tired eyes, the same lawyer who'd handled Charlie's estate 10 years ago. He adjusted his glasses and sighed before he even spoke. "Ruth," he said carefully, "tell me this is a joke." "It's not. Do you realize what you're doing? You're about to buy 49% of your daughter-in-law's company. That's not an investment, that's an invasion." I leaned closer to the camera, my voice steady. "Sometimes, Samir, the only way to get your voice back is to buy it." He blinked, then laughed once, not mockingly, just in disbelief. "You always were the calm one," he said, shaking his head, "but calm can be dangerous when it's this deliberate." "Good," I said simply. "I've had enough of being harmless." Samir looked down at the papers on his desk. "Everything's clean. We'll move through Horizon Equity as planned. No public. Record ties your name to the purchase, but once the audit begins, Brooke will know. I'm counting on it. He paused. Are you sure, Ruth? Once this goes through, you're not just watching from the sidelines anymore. You'll be part of it. The meetings, the board, the numbers. It's a lot. I built those numbers, I said quietly. Just because they forgot doesn't mean I did. He nodded slowly. Then it's done. The call ended. The screen returned to my reflection, the faint outline of a woman who'd once been invisible and now occupied the entire frame. I printed the confirmation email, the paper slid out warm, the black ink crisp and final. At the bottom, my name in blue digital ink, Ruth Ellison. I held it up to the light, watching the letters glow faintly against the morning sun. Then I walked to the living room, opened the old oak cabinet, and took out the box labeled Charlie. Inside were the things I hadn't touched in years. His fountain pen, his cufflinks, the photo from our first house, our marriage certificate, faded but intact. I placed the share certificate beside it, paper against paper. Different kinds of vows, maybe, but both made with the same purpose: partnership, trust, and a belief that what you build with care deserves to last. For a moment, I closed my eyes and whispered, "We built a legacy, Charlie. I'm just taking it back." The room was quiet except for the soft tick of the clock. I sat down again, poured the last of the coffee, and let myself breathe. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like restoration. Everything I'd lost, my place at the table, my say in the family, my name on something that used to belong to us, was coming back, one calculated step at a time. The sun rose higher, spilling light across the stack of papers on my desk. The world outside sparkled, half-melted snow catching gold. I looked at the reflection of that light in my mug, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like winter. I've always believed that truth hides best in paperwork. People can smile, pose, and lie, but numbers don't. Charlie taught me that. The day after the transaction cleared, I logged into the Ellison Media and Comber financial system for the first time. The dashboard loaded slowly, a maze of tabs, client folders, and quarterly reports. It looked complicated, by design, I thought. The more chaos, the easier it is to hide. I poured a cup of coffee and started from the top. Revenue looked fine, too fine. Clean numbers, no human fingerprints, but expenses. That's where people leave pieces of themselves. Scrolling through purchase orders, one name appeared too often: Wellness Retreat, Santa Rosa. The entries were categorized as corporate health and team resilience. The invoices were glossy, professional, all approved by Brooke Ellison. Dates caught my attention. The first was March 18th, same week as her client trip to California. The next, July 9th. I remembered that one clearly. She'd been posting videos from a luxury spa with ocean views and captioned them Mental Health Week. Curious, I opened the expense receipt. Hotel, Solace Springs Resort. Amount, $4,285. Guest name, Brooke Ellison. Companion, Logan Pierce. I didn't need Google to remember who Logan was. Brooke's trainer, the one she always claimed helped her stay focused. A quiet laugh escaped me. It wasn't funny, but it was satisfying in its precision. They always underestimate what mothers notice. I made a note. Wellness Retreat, Logan Pierce. Duplicate expenses, 3x. Check travel overlap. The next folder was labeled Client-Reimbursement-Final XLS. I clicked and immediately noticed the version history. 9 edits in 1 week. Red flag. Opening the spreadsheet, I saw a column marked Charitable Refunds. Dozens of line items listed small nonprofits, local shelters, education groups, animal rescues, all billed for marketing support packages. The totals were off by just enough to look like rounding errors, but I'd lived with a man who could spot a missing cent from 100 pages away. I knew how to read shadows. One entry stood out. Hopewell Children's Fund, invoice 12,800 paid twice. I checked the second payment reference number. It led to a different account, not company, not client. Something offshore. I traced the trail until I found it. L. Pierce Holdings, LLC, her trainer. I sat back, breathing slowly. The pattern was too perfect to be coincidence. Small, spread-out theft. Enough to stay under external audit radar. But now, the numbers had a witness. I printed the files, not all, just enough. Each page slid from the printer warm and real, the ink still fresh. I laid them across the kitchen table like crime scene photos. dates, signatures, transfers, and beneath it all, one name repeated like a drumbeat, approved by Brooke Ellison. No detective would see it yet. But I did, because I knew where to look. I opened the company messaging app and searched the employee list. Lisa Tran, junior accountant. Her name appeared on almost every modification in the file history. It was late afternoon when I called her. The tone in her voice when she answered told me she already knew why. Lisa, this is Ruth Ellison. I'm reviewing the Q2 files and I noticed your edits on the reimbursement sheets. She went silent. I could hear the faint sound of typing stop mid-stroke. I didn't change anything major, she said, her voice trembling. Just what I was told to. Told by who? Pause. A shaky breath. Mrs. Ellison, please. I have student loans. They said if I didn't adjust the invoices, they'd replace me. I swear I didn't know it was wrong at first. Brooke said it was standard practice. Standard practice, I repeated slowly, letting the words settle between us. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have. Lisa, I interrupted gently. You did your job. Now it's time for me to do mine. When I hung up, I printed her audit logs. Every entry lined up. Timestamps, user IDs, transaction edits. She'd done what she said, followed orders. Brooke's orders. By the time the printer stopped, the table was full. 60 pages of evidence, neat and deliberate. I stacked them carefully, squared the corners, clipped them together. There was no anger, just arithmetic. I looked at the pile of papers, a quiet mountain of truth. The kind that doesn't need shouting. I remembered something Charlie had said when we were newly married, sitting on the floor, surrounded by receipts. He'd laughed, handing me a ledger, and said, People think accounting is boring, Ruth, but it's the art of watching liars trip over their own math. I smiled now, faint but real. The house was silent except for the hum of the heater and the faint click of the printer cooling down. I placed the documents in a folder labeled Audit Review, Confidential, then tucked it into the drawer beneath Charlie's photo. I didn't feel vindictive, just alert. I'd spent years believing Brooke's version of order, her smooth voice, her curated control. Now I had her real order, every transaction, every fake receipt, every lie with a timestamp. I poured another cup of coffee and leaned on the counter, watching steam rise from the mug. No detective hat, no magnifying glass, just 40 years of watching a man balance numbers until truth appeared on the page. You don't have to be a genius to find deceit. You just have to pay attention. And for the first time in a long while, I was paying attention. I spent the rest of that night sorting, labeling, cross-checking. Every misfiled invoice, every payment with a ghost recipient, every wellness retreat, expense that doubled as a romantic weekend. It was like assembling a puzzle of betrayal, slow, methodical, clean. By midnight, the last file was printed, hole-punched, and placed into a binder. I wrote a title on the spine with a pen Charlie had once used. Evidence. Internal corruption. I sat back, exhausted but clear-headed. Outside, wind pressed against the window, rattling the glass. I looked at the stack of papers again, not with satisfaction, but respect. This was no longer about family drama. It was about integrity, something Brooke never understood, and something I refused to lose again. I whispered to the empty room, You built lies with money, I'll build truth with math. Then I turned off the printer, shut the laptop, and set the binder neatly beside my coffee mug. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt exact. There's something powerful about the decision to begin again, especially when no one expects you to. The morning after I finished reviewing the ledgers, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. My reflection looked like someone I half recognized. Hair dull, clothes soft and careful, eyes steady but tired. For 3 years, I'd been fading quietly, blending into corners, trying not to make noise. That version of me had served its purpose. Now I needed someone else. So I made an appointment. The salon smelled of hairspray and citrus, warm light bouncing off mirrors. I'd been coming here for 20 years, but hadn't visited since Charlie's funeral. The stylist, Maya, looked surprised when I walked in. Ruth, it's been forever, she said, holding my hands. What are we doing today? Just a trim? I met her eyes in the mirror. No, I said, we're doing something honest. She blinked, smiling nervously. Honest? I don't need to look young, I said. I need to look like someone they should be afraid of. Mia's smile faded into something respectful. Got it. She picked up her scissors and ran them through my hair, studying the texture. You've got great silver coming in, natural, strong. Then let it show, I said. When the first strands fell onto the floor, I felt lighter. Not because of the haircut, but because each snip sounded like a quiet rejection of everything I'd swallowed over the years. Mia worked in silence for a while, then asked gently, "Big day coming up?" "You could say that," I replied. "A meeting I've been waiting for." She smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure they don't forget it." When she finished, the mirror showed someone sharper. My silver hair framed my face like steel. The lines that used to bother me now looked deliberate. Proof of survival, not age. I looked like a woman who'd stopped asking for permission. After the salon, I went downtown. Department stores on a weekday morning always feel half empty, like the world hasn't woken up yet. I liked that. I moved through aisles quietly, touching fabrics, letting instinct choose. The sales associate was young, 20, maybe 21, all smiles and politeness. "Looking for something special today?" she asked. "Yes," I said, running my hand over a graphite gray blazer. "Something that feels like authority." "Ah," she grinned. "Courtroom power or boardroom power?" "Boardroom," I said without hesitation. "The kind that makes people stop talking when you walk in." Her eyes lit up. "I know exactly what you need." She brought me 3 suits, graphite, navy, and deep forest. I tried the graphite first. When I stepped in front of the mirror, the light caught the fabric just right, matte but commanding. I turned sideways, then faced myself. The person staring back wasn't invisible anymore. I adjusted the lapels, smoothed the sleeve. For the first time in years, the reflection didn't apologize for existing. I smiled slightly. "Perfect," I said. That evening, I returned home carrying the garment bag and a small box of polished black heels. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that used to feel heavy. Tonight, it felt earned. I hung the suit by the window where the last light of day touched it. Then I turned on the record player. Charlie's old jazz vinyl crackled to life. Chet Baker, Almost Blue. The trumpet filled the air, smooth and melancholy. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the bright yellow one Brooke had once called too cheerful for guests. I liked it more every year. I sat by the window, watching snowflakes drift past the glass, and spoke quietly to the room. For 3 years, I said, I fit into everything but silence. The words surprised me. Simple, but true. I'd made myself smaller to keep peace, quieter to keep family, softer to keep appearances. All it had done was erase me from my own life. Not anymore. Tomorrow I'd walk into that office, their office, not as the mother who baked cookies or smiled politely at being left out. I'd walk in as the majority investor, as the woman whose name was on the papers that kept the lights on. I traced my finger along the edge of the coffee mug, the warmth seeping into my palm. The suit glowed faintly in the dim light, like a flag raised in silence. Some transformations happen loud. New hair, new clothes, new world. Mine happened quietly. A new posture. A new kind of stillness. The kind that unsettles people who used to underestimate you. Before bed, I packed my bag. Notebook, pen. The binder labeled evidence, internal corruption. I slipped my wedding ring off, placed it beside the share certificate on my desk, and looked at both. Not goodbye, just acknowledgement. One life closing, another opening. The city outside was silent except for the hum of distant cars. I turned off the lights and stood in front of the window for a moment. It started snowing before sunrise. Heavy, quiet snow, the kind that covers sound and makes the city feel like it's holding its breath. The windshield wipers moved in slow rhythm as I drove toward downtown Minneapolis. The world outside was gray and white, still and deliberate. I'd lived through 65 winters, but that morning felt different. Not cold, just clear. Traffic was light. Most people stayed home when the sky looked like this, but I wasn't most people anymore. By the time I parked, the snow had already begun to pile along the sidewalks, soft mounds untouched by footprints. I stepped out carefully, my graphite suit brushing against the wind, the air sharp enough to wake every nerve. The Ellison Media and Comer building stood tall, glass and steel, pretending to be invincible. I'd seen it in photos before, but walking through its revolving doors now felt like stepping into a version of my own past, one that didn't know I was coming back. The receptionist glanced up, startled. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," I said, setting down my leather briefcase. "Mrs. Ruth Ellison. I'm expected. Her eyes darted to the meeting schedule on her screen, then back to me. Oh, you're with the audit team? In a manner of speaking, I said with a polite smile. I could see the conference room from the lobby, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a long table gleaming under white light. Inside were faces that once thought they controlled everything. Brooke, poised but tense, Mark, looking restless, Allison Reed, the company attorney, and Nora Patel, the external auditor from Morrison and Chen Associates. They were mid-discussion when I walked in. The sound of my heels against the marble floor echoed. Click, click, click. Slow, steady, undeniable. Brooke looked up first, her face drained of color faster than I could have imagined. "Ruth," she said, half standing, "what are you doing here?" Allison, the lawyer, turned in her chair, frowning. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this is a closed internal audit meeting." "Good," I said, placing my briefcase on the table. "I'm internal. 48% internal." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Mark's mouth opened, then closed again. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Before I could answer, the door opened again. Samir Patel entered, snow still clinging to his coat, a folder tucked neatly under his arm. He gave a small nod toward the room. "Apologies for the delay. Traffic?" Then, without ceremony, he placed the folder in front of Allison. "Ownership verification. Effective December 29th, Mrs. Ruth Ellison, through Horizon Equity Group, holds 48% of Ellison Media & Co.'s." Brooke's chair creaked as she leaned forward, her voice shaking. "That's impossible. You don't even know what Horizon Equity is." "I know exactly what it is," I said, meeting her eyes. "It's the sound of me getting my seat back." Mark looked from me to Brooke, his expression caught between confusion and disbelief. "Mom, you bought into Brooke's company without telling us?" I turned toward him. "Without asking you, yes. There's a difference." The auditor, Nora Patel, cleared her throat gently. "Mrs. Ellison, as part of this audit, we're currently reviewing discrepancies in expense reports and client payments. If you'd like, we can—" "I'm aware," I interrupted. "In fact, I'm the one who requested this audit." Nora blinked. "You requested it?" "Through my attorney," I said, nodding toward Samir. "We found multiple financial irregularities during preliminary review. I thought it would be best to make them official." Brooke's hands gripped the edge of the table. "You went through my books?" "Our books," I corrected. "You'd be surprised how much you can learn when you're treated like you wouldn't understand." Allison's professional mask was slipping just slightly. "Mrs. Ellison, perhaps we can discuss this privately." "No," I said evenly. "Let's keep it public. Transparency seems appropriate given the circumstances." For a moment, no one moved. Outside the glass walls, snow kept falling, silent and relentless. I could feel the weight of their shock, the sudden reversal of gravity in the room. Brooke sat rigid, her manicured hand trembling against the table. Mark leaned back, eyes searching mine, still trying to understand how the woman who used to bake pies for Sunday lunch was now sitting across from them with legal documents and authority. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Why, Mom?" I looked at him. My son, grown, loyal, blinded. "Because," I said softly, "when people spend years teaching you to leave the table, they forget who bought the table in the first place." The words landed like snow, soft, but heavy enough to stay. Nora adjusted her glasses and began opening her audit binder, her professionalism steady even in the tension. "Mrs. Ellison, since you're now a major stakeholder, you're entitled to full visibility. There are multiple flagged transactions that require explanation." Brooke interrupted, her voice rising. "This is absurd. I built this company. I won't have it hijacked by—" "By what?" I asked quietly. "By the woman who funded your first campaign when you couldn't afford office rent? By the woman who watched you exclude her from her own grandchildren's birthdays?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Allison, the lawyer, interjected quickly. "We'll need to confirm these documents through the SEC. Until then, I advise everyone to stay calm." Samir's tone was dry. "Already confirmed." He handed her a second folder. Ownership registration, verification letter, and share transfer receipts. Brooke's hand trembled. As she reached for the documents, she scanned them quickly and her jaw tightened with each page. Finally, she looked up. "You did this to humiliate me." I met her stare evenly. No, I did this to hold you accountable. The word accountable seemed to echo around the room like a bell. For the next few minutes, the air shifted. The audit continued, voices measured, cautious. Nora read figures. Allison took notes. Brooke tried to recover her composure, spinning half-explanations, corporate phrases, oversight, clerical error, processing delay. But the numbers spoke louder, and I understood every one of them. I didn't need to raise my voice or argue. I just watched, listened, took notes. At one point, Brooke's pen slipped from her hand, clattering against the table. No one moved to pick it up. When the meeting finally paused, Nora looked toward me. Mrs. Ellison, would you like to add anything before we adjourn for the day? I stood slowly, closing my notebook. I think I've said enough for now. Then I looked directly at Brooke. Just make sure your numbers are honest, dear. The snow has a way of revealing everything it covers. As I left the room, I felt every pair of eyes follow me, not out of pity, but out of recognition. Outside, the snow was still falling, thicker now, coating the cars and sidewalks in white silence. I stood for a moment in the cold, the city lights blurred through the flurries, and exhaled. It wasn't anger I felt. It was balance. The world had tilted for years, and now... The next morning, the office was too quiet. You could feel it, the kind of silence that comes after people realize the story they've been living in is about to end. They had called another follow-up audit meeting. Brooke's idea. Damage control, I guessed. She wanted to contain the fire. She didn't realize the whole building was already burning. When I entered the conference room, the air was tense. Mark sat stiffly near the window, avoiding my eyes. Brooke was already there, her hair perfect, her expression practiced, the same mask she'd worn for years. Next to her sat Allison Reed, the lawyer, and Nora, the auditor. Samir stood by the door, folder in hand. No one spoke at first, just the quiet shuffle of papers. I set my briefcase down, unlatched it slowly, and pulled out a thick folder. The sound of metal clasps opening broke the silence like a gunshot. I think, I said softly, we should start with transparency. I spread the documents across the table. Receipts, printouts, screenshots, invoices, photos. The truth, in alphabetical order. Brooke's face stayed neutral for exactly 5 seconds. Then her hand twitched. Mark leaned forward, brow furrowed. What is all this? Your wife's accounting, I said simply. Or, more precisely, her creative accounting. The first sheet was an invoice labeled Wellness Retreat, Santa Rosa. I slid it toward Brooke. Paid twice, once through company funds, once through a personal account disguised as a client refund. That's not true, she snapped. It was a legitimate corporate event. I placed another paper on top of it, a hotel confirmation under her name and Logan Pierce, her personal trainer. Mark's head jerked toward her. Brooke, what is this? She swallowed hard, voice trembling. It's a misfiled document. Probably Lisa's mistake. Lisa Tran? I asked. Funny you mention her. I nodded toward the door. Samir opened it. Lisa entered nervous, clutching a printed email chain. She looked young, too young to have been dragged into someone else's corruption. I didn't want to come, she said quietly, but Mrs. Ellison said the truth matters. Tell them what you told me, I said. Lisa's hands shook as she held out the papers. These are the emails Brooke sent me. She told me to duplicate client invoices and redirect part of the payment to an alternate account. When I asked about it, she said it was standard, and that if I talked, I'd be replaced. Brooke shot up from her chair, voice rising. That's ridiculous. She's lying. Lisa flinched, her eyes filling with tears. I'm not lying. You said the same thing to Ben in accounting. He quit after you screamed at him. Mark looked pale now. He picked up the top sheet of paper, one of the expense reports, and scanned it, his lips tightening with every line. This one says, Hopewell Children's Fund, he said, his voice low. You overcharged them? Brooke's jaw set. It was a clerical error. You signed it, he interrupted, tapping the page. You approved this, twice. She turned on me, fury breaking through her mask. You think you can just waltz in here, dig through my files, and humiliate me in front of my husband? I met her gaze without blinking. No, Brooke. You humiliated yourself the moment you took what wasn't yours. For a few seconds, no one breathed. Then I reached into the folder again, pulled out a printed screenshot, Brooke and Logan on the beach, laughing, champagne glasses in hand. The caption, Recharge weekend with my favorite person. I placed it gently in front of her. Those wellness retreats you billed to charity accounts, this is what you were recharging for? She slammed her hand on the table. That's personal. You had no right to. Personal? I asked quietly. You paid for it with company money. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then I added the final blow, a bank statement with transfers from Ellison Media's business account to L. Pierce Holdings, LLC. Logan's company, I said. Convenient, isn't it? Mark's voice broke. Brooke, tell me this isn't real. She turned to him, reaching for his hand. Mark, please. You know how these things look on paper. It's complicated. He pulled away. No, it's simple. You stole. You lied. You used our business and my mother's name to fund your affair. Tears welled in her eyes, but I'd seen her cry before. It was a performance, one she used whenever she needed sympathy. I leaned forward slightly. You don't need to pretend, Brooke. Numbers don't care about tears. Allison, the lawyer, finally spoke. Let's not make this personal. These are allegations that require formal. They're not allegations, Samir interrupted. They're verified transactions. We've confirmed all of them through the audit system. Mrs. Ellison's documentation is complete. Allison's jaw tightened. She knew the fight was lost. Brooke's voice cracked high and desperate. This is entrapment. You set me up. You planned this. I shook my head slowly. No, you set yourself up. I just followed your hashtags. The room went utterly silent. Even Nora, the auditor, looked stunned. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air vent. Outside, snow drifted past the glass, melting against the window. I gathered the papers back into a neat pile, aligning their edges with care. Then I said quietly, I'm not here to destroy you, Brooke. I'm here to repair what you broke. Our name, our integrity, our company. Her voice was hoarse now. You'll ruin me. No, I said. You did that when you thought no one was watching. Mark leaned back, covering his face with his hands. God, Brooke, how could you? Her shoulders trembled, and for the first time I saw real fear. Not anger, not pride, but the shock of someone realizing the walls had truly closed in. Allison began packing her files wordlessly. Nora ended the meeting, her tone clipped but polite. We'll finalize our findings and submit the full report within 48 hours. No one answered. I stood, picked up my briefcase, and looked at Brooke one last time. You know, I said quietly, I used to think you were clever, but clever people cover their tracks. You documented your own downfall in high definition. As I walked out, the hallway lights flickered slightly. The building's hum felt different, not triumphant, not vindictive, just balanced. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sun was out, but the air was still cold, clear, and sharp. I took a deep breath. The first battle was done. They thought they'd silenced me. Now they couldn't stop hearing me. They showed up at 9 on a Sunday morning, a news van, a reporter, and my daughter-in-law standing on my lawn like she was about to win something. Mrs. Ellison, the woman called out, her voice too cheerful for January. We're from Channel 8. Your family's worried you've been exploited in a business scam. Would you be willing to comment? Behind her, Brooke crossed her arms, pretending to look concerned. She's been manipulated, she said loudly. My mother-in-law doesn't understand what's happening. These people convinced her to buy into our company to hurt us. It's elder abuse. I almost laughed. The same woman who spent years calling me irrelevant now wanted me to look helpless. Come in, I said. It's cold. The cameraman followed them inside. I poured coffee while they set up near the dining table. The reporter smiled at me as if I might forget my own name. Mrs. Ellison, we've heard claims that someone took advantage of you financially after your husband's death. Are you aware of any manipulation? Yes, I said, but not the kind you think. I opened my laptop on the table. The screen filled with spreadsheets, account statements, and signed evaluations. I manage my own portfolio, I told them evenly. $4.6 million in diversified assets, consistent profits. Here are 5 years of tax returns. And this, I handed over a folder, is a psychological assessment from Dr. Klein at Northwestern. No cognitive decline. Not yet, anyway. The reporter's practiced smile slipped. Brooke blinked. What is this? Evidence, I said. They didn't expect calm. They expected confusion, a poor widow clutching at memories. Mrs. Ellison, the reporter tried again, do you believe someone influenced your investment decisions? Absolutely, I said. The influence came from what I found: embezzlement, false invoices, and personal expenses hidden under business accounts, conducted by the woman standing behind you. The camera turned toward Brooke. Her face froze. That's not true, she stammered. She's been tricked. I clicked through another folder: photos, bank transfers, hotel receipts. The image of Brooke and her trainer, smiling at a luxury resort, appeared on screen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Each picture spoke for me. If anyone here has been manipulated, I said quietly, it's you, by the woman who's been lying to you. The reporter looked from me to Brooke, then to the evidence. The cameraman lowered his lens a little, uncertain now whom to film. Brooke's tone cracked. You can't use this. It's private. You posted it publicly, I reminded her. #wellness, remember? Logan, the trainer, had been waiting by the door, his face drained of color. Brooke, maybe we should... Be quiet, she hissed, but the silence that followed was louder than any shouting. I turned to the reporter again. You wanted a story about elder abuse, I said. You've got one, just not the kind you expected. The woman cleared her throat. We'll verify before airing anything. That would be wise, I said. Accuracy's important. It saves people from lawsuits. The camera light blinked off. They left quickly. Brooke lingered, shaking with anger. You think this is over? She said through clenched teeth. You just humiliated me on camera. I looked at her, steady. No, Brooke. You did that the moment you brought them here. Her eyes filled, but not with tears, with panic. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I poured myself another cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the van drive away. The snow had started again, soft and slow. People always assume power is loud. Meetings, arguments, threats. But real power doesn't shout. It just opens a laptop, shows the truth, and waits for silence to do the rest. The boardroom didn't feel intimidating anymore. It was the same glass walls, the same chrome table, the same sterile air. But this time, I didn't walk in as a guest. I walked in as the owner. Outside, the snow had melted into thin streams of water tracing down the windows. Inside, the tension had frozen instead. I took my seat at the head of the table. The chair didn't creak. It belonged there. So did I. Most of the board members were already in place. Old investors, quiet faces who'd made their money by staying out of sight. Their eyes darted between me and the empty seat where Brooke used to sit. Samir stood at my right, flipping through the acquisition documents. The stack was thick but orderly, the paperwork of inevitability. One of the board members cleared his throat. Mrs. Ellison, several partners are concerned about the recent publicity. They're considering withdrawing their positions. I nodded. They're free to. He hesitated. That could destabilize the company. Not if I buy them out first. A pause. The rustle of papers. I looked across the table at the investor list projected on the screen. 9 names, each one holding small percentages. Their confidence had evaporated after the Channel 8 broadcast. Fear moves fast in business. Gentlemen, I said quietly, I understand fear. But fear only makes sense when you don't know where the fire is. I tapped the screen. I do. That afternoon, the signatures came one by one. Each investor accepted the buyout without argument. No one wanted to be associated with scandal, even if the scandal was finally over. By 3 p.m., the papers were ready. Samir slid them across the table, his pen resting neatly on top. I signed my name. Once, twice, 3 times. It didn't feel like conquest. It felt like maintenance. When I finished, Samir said softly, 71% ownership confirmed. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Good. Then let's clean house. The door opened. Brooke walked in. She looked smaller, not physically, but inwardly. Her makeup was muted, her posture careful. The room went silent. She approached the table, holding a thin envelope. I've already spoken with Allison, she said, her voice steady but fragile. Here's my resignation, effective immediately. I didn't stand. Accepted. She hesitated as if waiting for me to say something else. Maybe to offer forgiveness, maybe to lash out. I did neither. Brooke, I said finally, this company will survive because the truth did. I hope someday you learn to do the same. She looked down. You've taken everything." "No," I said. "I took responsibility." Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue. She placed the envelope on the table and turned to leave. As she reached the door, she stopped. "You're colder than I thought, Ruth." I met her eyes. "No, just cleaner." She left without another word. The silence she left behind was almost peaceful. Mark had been quiet the entire meeting. Now he finally spoke. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't know you could be like this." I looked at him. My son, the boy who used to bring me coffee in bed every Sunday, now a man caught between loyalty and understanding. "That's because you never had to be," I said. He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You've never had to learn how to exist in a room you weren't invited into," I said gently. "I did. Every day for years." He didn't respond right away. His eyes shimmered, not from anger, but something else. Recognition, maybe. "I didn't see it," he murmured. "You weren't supposed to," I said. "I kept it quiet so you could grow without inheriting my silence." For a long moment he just sat there, his jaw tight. Then he whispered, "I'm proud of you." I smiled faintly. "That makes one of us." After everyone left, I stayed behind. The room felt lighter, as if all the years of compromise had finally evaporated. Papers stacked neatly in front of me, coffee cup cooling beside the pen I'd used. Through the glass wall I could see the city, gray sky breaking open, streaks of sunlight cutting through. I gathered my things slowly, every movement deliberate. I didn't feel victorious, I felt restored. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud, messy, temporary. This was clarity, quiet, durable, final. As I left the conference room, my heels echoed against the floor, each step steady, each sound belonging. Outside, the air was cold again, but not biting. I could smell the faint trace of spring under the snow. People think justice is dramatic. Courtroom confessions, shouting matches, apologies. It isn't. Justice is paperwork, signatures. And the moment you stop... The house was too quiet again. For the first time in months, there was no noise. No calls, no lawyers, no cameras, no footsteps of strangers pretending to care. Just the sound of the clock in the kitchen, tick, tick, tick. I stood at the counter, pouring hot water into a pot of tea. The steam curled against the window pane, blurring the snow outside. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, the same one he'd done homework on when he was 12. His hands were wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. His eyes were somewhere else. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he said, "Mom, you're destroying my marriage." The word mom hit like a crack in old glass. He hadn't called me that in years. It was always mother lately. Polite, careful, distant. I didn't turn around right away. I just stirred the tea, listening to the spoon tap against porcelain. "No, Mark," I said quietly. "Your wife destroyed it. I just stopped pretending not to see it." He exhaled hard, his shoulders tense. "You didn't have to do all this in public. The company, the news, the lawyers. It's humiliating." "For who?" I asked. "For the woman who stole from her clients? Or the man who looked away until someone else cleaned the mess?" He didn't answer, just rubbed his temple with his thumb. "You think this feels good for me?" I said softly. "You think I enjoy sitting in that boardroom watching my family fall apart? I didn't want any of this, but the truth doesn't care what we want." He looked up at me then. His eyes were red, tired. "I loved her, Mom." "I know. I still do. I know that too." He swallowed. "She's not all bad." "Neither was I said, "but she made me feel like I was." Silence again. Only the kettle whistling softly in the background. I sat down across from him and poured tea into both cups. He didn't reach for his. I didn't push. "When you were 12, I began slowly. You took $20 from my purse. Remember that?" He frowned, confused. I bought comic books." "I know," I said. "And when I found out, I asked you if stealing was wrong because you got caught." He looked away, embarrassed, like a boy again. "You said it was wrong because I did it in the first place." I nodded. "That lesson didn't change with age, Mark. Brooke didn't just get caught. She chose wrong, again and again, until the truth caught up with her." He was quiet. His hands trembled slightly. After a while, he whispered, "You could have told me sooner." "I tried," I said. "But you were in love, and love makes smart people deaf." He laughed weakly, shaking his head. You really think this is going to make me feel better? No, I said. I think it's going to make you see clearer. He stared at the table, tears starting to form in the corners of his eyes. I keep thinking about the kids. How they'll look at me. At her. They'll look at you the way you look at yourself, I said gently. So make sure they see someone honest, not someone who hides behind excuses. He pressed his palms to his eyes, voice breaking. I hate that it came to this. So do I said. But sometimes the only way out of a lie is through the fire. He nodded, still covering his face. Then, quietly, like it surprised him too, he said, I'm sorry, Mom. The word Mom again, softer this time. True. I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. His skin was cold, trembling slightly. This isn't victory, I said. It's cleansing. We're not winners here, Mark. We're just people who finally stopped pretending. He squeezed my hand just once. No words. For a long time we sat there listening to the clock. The steam from the tea rose between us like breath, not of distance, but of something fragile returning. Outside, the snow had stopped. The late afternoon light spread slowly across the counter, catching the edge of the old photograph on the fridge. The three of us, long ago, before grief, before distance. Charlie's smile, my arm around a boy who still believed that right and wrong were simple things. Maybe they were once. Maybe they still are. Mark looked up. Will you ever forgive her? I took a breath. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. But someday when she learns what she's done, really learns, I might stop wishing she hadn't. He nodded slowly. I think I understand. I smiled faintly. That's all I wanted. He finished his tea finally, lukewarm now, and stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. You know, for what it's worth, I don't think you're destroying anything. I tilted my head. No? He shook his head. I think you're rebuilding it. Just not the way any of us expected. Then he left, closing the door gently behind him. The kitchen felt warmer after he was gone. I gathered the cups, washed them, and set them on the rack to dry. My hands moved on instinct, steady and sure. Through the window, I could see the first hint of sunlight breaking through the clouds, a thin golden line, soft but certain. Somewhere upstairs, the old house creaked, settling back into quiet. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. It was Sunday morning, the kind that smelled like coffee and warm butter. I was at the stove, flipping pancakes the way I used to when Mark was little. The kitchen window was open, letting in the sound of birds and the faint laughter of my grandchildren from the backyard. Then I heard the knock. Not gentle, controlled, deliberate. I didn't need to look. I already knew. Brooke. She stood in the doorway, perfectly dressed as always, though her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. And behind her, Emma and Owen. The kids ran past her the second they saw me. Grandma? Owen's voice was bright, innocent. Emma followed, carrying her backpack. Breakfast smells amazing, she said, like nothing had changed. Pancakes? Always, I smiled. You two go wash up. They disappeared down the hall, their laughter echoing, light and unknowing. For a moment, I wished I could be part of their version of reality, where everything was still simple, where betrayal didn't have names. When I turned back, Brooke was still standing there, her expression cold, her arms crossed. You're teaching them to hate me, she said. Her voice was steady, too steady. I placed the spatula down carefully. No, I said. I'm teaching them to tell the difference between actions and consequences. Her jaw tightened. Don't play word games with me, Ruth. They're confused. You're turning them against their mother. I looked at her, really looked at her. For years, I'd seen the mask, the charm, the control, the performance. Now it was all cracking layer by layer. They're not confused, I said. They're just finally seeing what honesty looks like. She took a sharp breath. You think this makes you righteous? Destroying their family? I didn't destroy anything, I said quietly. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. The kettle whistled softly, cutting through the silence. I turned it off and poured tea into 2 cups. Sit down, I said. She didn't move. Suit yourself, I added, taking a sip. Her voice cracked. You took my company, my reputation, my husband, my kids. No, I said, still calm. You gave them away. Her eyes flared. You think you're better than me? No, I said simply. I think I'm honest about who I am. That's enough. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Do you ever get tired of being alone, Ruth? Of sitting in this big house pretending it means something? I looked around the kitchen, sunlight on the counter, the smell of butter and maple syrup, the faint sound of laughter outside. I'm not pretending, I said. I'm living. She sneered. You're pathetic. You sit here surrounded by ghosts. You're so lonely you use your grandkids as props in your moral theater. I didn't react. I'd learned long ago that anger only feeds people like her. Better lonely than surrounded by lies, I said softly. She froze, like the words had landed deeper than she expected. Come with me, I said after a pause. There's something you should see. I led her down the hall into my study, the same room that started all of this. She hesitated at the door, eyes scanning the space she once mocked as old and dusty. On the desk was a single folder. I opened it and slid the document toward her. Her name was printed neatly across the top. Severance agreement, final. The line for payment read, 0.2 Her hand trembled slightly as she read it. You really enjoy this, don't you? Watching me fall. No, I said. I enjoy closure. She lifted her eyes to mine, and for a moment the mask was gone. What I saw instead wasn't arrogance. It was fear. Do you know what it's like, she whispered, to wake up and realize everyone hates you? Yes, I said quietly. I used to think everyone pitied me. Turns out it's not so different. Her mouth twisted. You're cruel. I shook my head. No, just finished? For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The house was so quiet I could hear the kids laughing outside, arguing over who got the last pancake. Brooke finally pushed the folder back across the table. You win? This isn't winning, I said. It's what happens when truth finally shows up. She gave a small, bitter laugh. Truth doesn't pay the bills. No, I said, but it sleeps at night. She turned toward the door, her shoulders rigid. Before leaving, she looked back one last time. Her eyes were tired, stripped of defiance. You'll die alone, Ruth. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll die right. The words hung in the air between us, quiet, final, absolute. She left without closing the door behind her. I stood there for a while, letting the silence settle again. Then I went back to the kitchen. The kids were laughing, syrup on their fingers, the kind of joy untouched by adult failures. I smiled and sat with them, cutting a pancake in half, listening to Emma's story about school, Owen's joke about his math teacher. Brooke's car engine started outside. It faded down the road. The laughter remained. I looked at them, on my son's children, my second chance, and thought, this is what survival sounds like.